What is going on, guys? Yes, don't be alarmed. This is a pre-recorded video, not a live stream or a wrestling video. We are going to try to do something different since we are on the road to Endgame. Now, instead of doing a movie-by-movie breakdown of the MCU, we decided to do a character breakdown of all the major characters in the MCU. So, let's get ready to do a deep dive into Iron Man. Iron Man was the first installment in the MCU and was the driving character into creating the vast universe of the Marvel movies. From his own trilogy to the Avengers movies and some other appearances, Tony Stark after Endgame will have appeared in 10 MCU movies, the most out of anybody. We're going to take a deep look at Tony Stark throughout all 9 movies, so let's take a look at the character development of Iron Man because, well,
we're in the endgame now.
Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr.'s character, has changed quite a bit since his first movie to now. In the first Iron Man movie, Tony Stark started off the movie as a weapons manufacturer. After being taken hostage by the terrorist group Ten Rings, he realized that the enemy had gotten a hold of his weapons and, well, he decided to quit making weapons altogether. Instead, he created the Iron Man suit. Now, Mark 1 was the suit that we see in the cave in Afghanistan. Mark 2 is the one that he used to test flying abilities. And then Mark 3 was the hot rod red suit that we are so used to seeing. He had to overcome Obadiah Stane, who had taken Tony under his wing after his father's death, but who had also been lying to Tony about who he was selling the weapons to. After the two fought in their iron metal suits, Tony was able to defeat Stane and take back his company. The movie ended the best way that it could, with Tony coming clean and telling everyone that he is Iron Man. And then we hear the classic song, Iron Man by Black Sabbath. You see, the first movie really set up the relationships between Tony and several recurring characters that we will see throughout the entire MCU. First, let's talk about Pepper and Tony. In the first Iron Man movie, Pepper is only Tony's assistant at the beginning of the movie. But then towards the end of it, she starts to become his love interest. This takes off even more after Iron Man 2 and goes all the way until now with Infinity War and Endgame. It also set up Rhodey, aka War Machine. Colonel Rhodes is played by 2 different actors. First, in Iron Man, he is played by Terrence Howard, and then in the second Iron Man movie, he is played by none other than Don Cheadle. They acknowledge the friendship between the two in this movie, and we see it blossom from here. Then comes the end credit scene. Now, what would a Marvel movie be without an end credit scene? And really, one of the biggest end credit scenes comes in the very first movie. In this, we see Tony Stark meeting Nick Fury for the first time in the MCU, and they discuss the Avengers initiative. Now, Tony does make an appearance in the Incredible Hulk movie, but really, that is just there to link the two universes together and nothing more. While Iron Man is an absolutely fantastic film, Iron Man 2 is a few steps back. From a very forgettable villain to a weak story, there really isn't a whole lot to remember. The only memorable thing from Iron Man 2 is, well, this.
I want my board. I want my board.
This is not my board. A man is not my board.
But this movie does give us a different look at Tony and sets up some very important characters for the future. Obviously, in this first movie, we are introduced to Black Widow, played by Scarlett Johansson, and then Don Cheadle takes on his role as Colonel Rhodes in War Machine. But at the beginning of the movie, not much has really changed with Tony. All that is really important to take away from this film is the fact that Pepper is now in charge of the company, and her and Tony are really a thing now. And it is setting up the future Avengers movie. We do see nods to both Captain America and Thor. While Tony is creating a new element, he uses a prototype of Cap's shield to help keep the little ring level. And then we also hear Agent Coulson is being assigned to a mission in New Mexico. And in the end credit scene, we see him pulling up to Thor's hammer in the desert. Iron Man and Iron Man 2 show us a lot about the person Tony Stark. But the true strong development of Tony's character really begins in the very first Avengers movie. The very first Avengers movie was extremely hyped, with the possibility of being the most amazing superhero movie to date or a complete disaster. But Tony Stark up to this point had been a one-man show. He was the one doing the saving and no one was really helping him. However, this film gives us an insight as to how the MCU will change over the next few years. The biggest takeaway from the first Avengers movie is the dynamic between Iron Man, Tony Stark, and Captain America, Steve Rogers. This is a friendship and a relationship that is the center and main focus for the most part of the MCU, for at least the main story. In the Avengers movie, this is the first time that we see the two together on the big screen. Obviously, in the origin movie for Captain America, we know that Tony's dad, Howard, and Captain America worked for S.H.I.E.L.D. and for the government. And this is brought up a few times throughout the film. There's the point where Tony tells Steve that he hated him as a kid because all his dad could talk about was Captain America. Tony Stark and Steve Rogers are like day and night. They are two completely different people with the same goal in mind. They are both good guys who are all about protecting the world, but towards the beginning of the film, both men could not stand each other. But by the end of the movie, and in the most iconic part of the film, the Battle of New York, Tony and Cap put their differences aside and began to work together for the good of the world. By the end of this movie, both Tony and Cap are good and are slowly building a friendship together. However, all good things don't last too long. Captain America isn't the only hero that Tony meets and becomes friends with. But in the Avengers movie, we really get to see Tony and Bruce working together and figuring out what Loki's scepter is all about and how he can control people with it, and really a whole lot of other stuff. Tony does meet Thor for the first time. Obviously, Tony doesn't make the best first impression, but they do work things out pretty quickly, and they begin to work together better than Cap and Tony do at the beginning. Now, before you start to freak out and start scream typing me, you forgot the biggest thing. Tony completely changed after going through the wormhole in New York and blah, 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 blah. Well, just chill out and listen. I'm getting there, but I'm linking that event with the events of Iron Man 3 because it is truly awesome how they play off the events of Avengers and Iron Man 3 together. Iron Man 3 deals with Tony trying to recover after flying into the wormhole in New York. The whole backstory and purpose of Iron Man 3 was to show Tony dealing with the PTSD of the Avenger movie. From nearly dying and seeing a massive alien attack, most individuals would face some sort of PTSD. Sometimes we forget that Tony is an actual human being. While Cap is a super soldier and Thor is a demigod and Hulk as well, the Hulk, Tony Stark is just a rich man flying around in a metal suit. So the events of the Avengers movie would totally take a lot out of Tony and cause him some problems. While Iron Man 3 isn't the best MCU movie and the villain can make people mad sometimes thinking about it, it really is a vital role in the MCU due to the fact that it shows Tony's progression of being the overly confident person in Iron Man to a freaked out and paranoid character. And this leads directly into the narrative in Age of Ultron. Yes, I know Age of Ultron is a very lackluster movie and can be somewhat hard to get through at times. And the gap between Iron Man 3 and Age of Ultron feels like forever. But this movie does show Tony's paranoia even more. I mean, the entire premise of Age of Ultron is the fact that Tony wants to keep the world as safe as possible. Tony created Ultron as a means of escape. By escape, I mean he created Ultron to do the job he was doing, but better. This all comes down from the fact that Tony's experience in the first Avengers movie made him realize that being a man in an iron suit was not enough to deal with the attacks from space. He had all the right intentions when creating Ultron, but he never thought Ultron would take on a mind of its own. Not only does Tony have to deal with the PTSD from the Avengers movie, but he also begins to deal with the vision that Scarlet Witch showed him towards the beginning of the film. Tony saw all of the Avengers massacred and dead, and when he leaned over Cap, Steve told him, "You could have saved us." After seeing this is when he decides to create Ultron, and well, this event would begin to tear the team apart little by little. That leads into the next movie we see Tony, and that is Civil War. Now, Civil War is one of, if not my favorite comic stories ever, and it is my favorite MCU movie of all time. The story is perfectly told, and it not only adds to the main story arc, but it also introduces new characters as well. Since this is all about Tony Stark, we're going to take a look at why he thinks he was right in the whole situation. After the events of Age of Ultron and Tony creating Ultron, he feels like the Avengers need to have someone over them. He feels like they need restrictions and that they can't do everything they want to and make everyone else face the consequences for their actions. The prime example of this comes in the first few minutes of Civil War when the mother of a young man that was killed in Sokovia confronts Tony about the whole thing. Obviously, Tony and Steve feel very differently about the subject, but looking at this entire situation from Tony's perspective, you can tell where he's coming from. I mean, in the first Avengers movie, the Avengers completely wrecked New York. And then in Age of Ultron, they completely wrecked Sokovia. Plus, in all of their own individual films, they did some pretty heavy damage as well. So Tony feels the extreme guilt for the attack of Sokovia, specifically because it was him that created Ultron. The thing that we have learned the most over these last 11 years of films is that when Tony feels guilt, he doesn't always think things through. Tony is feeling the entire weight of guilt and is all for creating regulations to keep everyone safe. And you can't really blame the guy. However, the Sokovia Accords isn't the only thing that Tony is dealing with in Civil War. Obviously, Tony and Steve don't see things eye to eye when it comes to the Accords, but then things get kind of difficult when Bucky shows up. Steve is more worried about Bucky, and Tony is more worried about taking away some of the guilt he feels. This leads to what I feel like is the best fight scene in all of the MCU, the airport fight scene. This is where we get to meet Spider-Man, which I will get to in a minute, and we get to know even more about Black Panther and Ant-Man. The reason why Bucky being thrown into the mix complicates things even more is due to the fact of Bucky and Tony's past. We finally get towards the end of the film, and we finally see Tony, Steve, and Bucky working together to stop Baron Zemo, but then things go south extremely fast. Baron Zemo plays the video from December 16th, 1991, and this is the video that shows the death of Howard and Maria Stark, Tony Stark's parents. Now, why does this complicate things? Well, because the man who killed them was none other than Bucky Barnes. Tony Stark understandably loses it and tries to attack Bucky, but Steve stops him. The thing that is so heartbreaking is seeing two guys who were so close as friends being at this point where they're being torn apart. Tony even asked Steve if he knew, and Steve said he did. Things escalate quickly, and the three men come to blows in what is the most emotional fight scene in all of the MCU to date. Steve tells Tony sorry, but he is my friend, and Tony simply replies, so was I. And I remember watching this in the theater and feeling like I just got hit in the stomach. So at this point, the Avengers are broken up, and Tony now has lost the love of his life, Pepper, but now he has also lost his best friend in Steve Rogers. So where does Tony go from here? Well, the next time we see Tony is in Spider-Man Homecoming. Tony's entire role in this film is taking on the mentor role for Peter Parker. It seems like the writing on the wall in the MCU is that Peter will fill the Tony role after Endgame, and the relationship between Peter and Tony perfectly show that. This film shows that Tony is still an arrogant, self-centered person, but deep down he cares about Peter. Tony has taken the Uncle Ben role in this movie, the only exception being that we actually like Tony and not Uncle Ben, as the person Peter looks up to the most and wants to be just like him. We can see throughout the film the relationship grows and that Peter is beginning to grow on Tony. At the end of the film, Peter has basically become like a son to Tony, and they have this deep personal connection together that is only further advanced in Infinity War. And here we are, what we can only assume to be the beginning of the end of Tony Stark in the MCU. We finally have reached Infinity War, the movie we have been waiting for 10 years, where for Tony, everything was supposed to come full circle. At this point, we didn't expect the Avengers to be broken up, and the fact that they aren't together makes this even more difficult for Tony. When he realizes that it was Thanos that attacked New York, and that he was the one who had caused all of these problems, Tony finally felt like he could make everything right again. I mean, that's the whole reason why he got on the Donut spaceship. That's why he flew to Titan. And that's why they made the plan to attack Thanos and remove the gauntlet. And this is what Tony's story arc has been the whole time. Tony starts off as a self-centered, egotistical weapons manufacturer in Iron Man 1 to what he is now. Yes, Tony is still egotistical, but he is the ultimate good guy now. He has people in his life that he cares about. Pepper, Rhodey, Peter, and even Steve. That's why the snap had such a massive effect on Tony. He saw the son he never had dusting away in front of him, and he has to deal with the fact that Thanos had won again. So where does this leave Tony for Endgame? Well, all the trailers we have seen have shown Tony as a defeated and depressed individual. Well, really everyone is. But Tony is dealing with his past guilt, and this is adding even more guilt to it. It is no coincidence that Tony is one of the four to say,
whatever it takes.
To be fully prepared for Tony's final movie in the MCU to have a satisfying, but yet an extremely sad ending as well. So that's our breakdown of Tony's character from Iron Man to Infinity War. Let us know what you guys thought about this, and let me know if I left anything out. Tell us what you love or hate about Tony's character and where you think he is going in Endgame in the comments down below. Make sure that you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and hit that notification bell so that you can be notified when our next character breakdown comes out. Follow me on Twitter at iLandyYork, and follow the channel at Nerd Crew Podcast. And we will catch you guys in the next video.